Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming, or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing.
Welcome to another episode of the Watchmen for Nixon podcast. I'm Joe.
And I'm Garrett.
And on this episode, we will be reviewing Season 1, Episode 4, titled, If You Don't Like My Story, Write Your Own. Garrett, what were your thoughts on this, man?
I will tell you, I think that this one, even though this episode I thought had a lot of really interesting components to it, answered a lot of questions. You and I had some theories of our own. I think they got some answers to them.
Agreed, very much so.
I would say that this was the downside of the first four episodes. So I would say this was probably my least favorite of the four. I do like that this one, though, just like all the other episodes, left a lot of questions that need to be answered that hopefully will get answered in the fifth episode, because they're doing a very good job of answering questions. Only, every two episodes they'll ask a question, one episode answer it the next episode. So there are a lot of things to unpack in this episode. I wasn't sure when we were preparing to do this one how long this episode would be, because I feel like there's not as much operating in the episodes as much as they were maybe in episodes 1 through, at least 1 and 2.
Right.
I think it's kind of more hemmed out to you're following Angela's character, Sister Knight, and you're kind of, that's who you're tracking. A couple side characters here or there popping in, not as much Red Scare, not as much Pirate Jenny, not as much Looking Glass, and we're trying to kind of world build here to some other people.
Agreed. It definitely felt like almost another introductory episode of sorts, because we do now get we get to see Lady True for the first time. We get the appearance of Lube Man, as he ends up being called, who knows who I have my own thoughts on who it probably is, but at the same time, it could be anyone, technically, at this point. So there's a couple of these characters, and just like you said, they're building out this world a little bit more, but they're leading just with more breadcrumbs at this point. So I think next episode, it seems like we're going to get that much more, especially for Looking Glass. Well, it looks like it'll probably be a Looking Glass heavy episode.
Yeah, and I'm super excited about that. I think about, before we started this series, and Damon Lindelof was talking about the potential of it being one season.
Right.
So if it's 9 episodes, we're kind of at the halfway mark, 4, episode 5, whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure if I feel like everything will be told in 5 episodes. I know that there were people that prior to this, who had reviewed, I think up to 6 episodes were not leaked, I want to say, but given out to reviewers or journalists.
Okay. Yeah.
And they said that the first 6 episodes were really great. And again, I'm very still fascinated with the show. I think the show is very good. I know you and I might have a little different opinion on that, which I want to get into in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that if this is intending to be a one-season story with no second season coming, and they're in fact going to turn this into a limited series, first off, I'd be shocked if they did, because it seems like it's very successful. And, Twitter's a talk about it, every night after an episode. People, everybody's writing reviews on it. So I think that there's an audience there for it to continue to, not only be successful, but profitable. So I would really be shocked if they made this one season. However, again, going back to the fact that if they do make this one season, I'm expecting a lot in the next 5 episodes then. Because I don't want this to be like Lost. Yep. I want all my things answered. And I want it to be wrapped up in a satisfactory way. Not happy ending per se, but just I don't want there to be large cliffhangers on stories of people that we were introduced in episode 4 or 5 that we really didn't have time to deal with in 4 episodes after that. Yeah, that's what my concern would be if this is going to be a one-season show.
Sure thing. I'm totally in agreement with you there. That's actually something that I'd put down to bring up later. As you mentioned, we have kind of some differing opinions on that. But that is absolutely something that I agree with. I think since we are pretty much at the halfway point, we're getting to the halfway point, that they're still introducing new characters. And if we are to take this at face value and assume that we're getting one self-contained season, at least for this, if they do end up giving us a season 2, great. And I do hope for that. I enjoy the show. But since it does sound like this at least will be self-contained, there is still, it seems like, a lot of ground to cover and a lot of new characters that we're just now being introduced to that we don't know a whole heck of a lot about. And I think there's probably 2 shows on a lot of people's minds while they're watching Watchmen, and that is Lost and Game of Thrones. and how probably something that people can agree on with those, now once again I haven't seen Lost, but based on what you've told me, is that the unsatisfactory conclusions to those shows, and since Lindelof has been involved with Lost and now is obviously helming Watchmen, and then Game of Thrones, which everybody compares everything to Game of Thrones, so that's a natural thing to try to do, I think, at that point, but both of those didn't really have very satisfactory conclusions, I would say, on the whole, so they better deliver on this, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And a couple things here, and we can jump right into our discussion on why it might not be, why our different opinions on the show so far. But I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure here. Disney Plus starts T-minus 24 hours essentially, and The Mandalorian releases.
That's right.
And there's a lot that these other networks are going to have to come up with. And again, I'm not worried about the Watchmen's first season being good. I think the show has been good. I think it's going to continue to be good. It's just, do they wrap this up in 5 more episodes? And if they do, is that going to be worth my time that I spent watching this series? Especially because I don't think people really understood if this was going to be a 1-season show going into it. I know he talked about the possibility that it could. I don't think they've ever said that this is a limited series. Now, as far as I know, there's no news on this being renewed for a second season yet. And I know that Lindelof said that there was a second season. He might not be a part of it.
Yeah,
and if that's the case, he's building a really neat world here, but can somebody else pick up this mantle and run with it? I'm not sure. But let's talk about this. So I'm still very much on board with the show. I watch it, obviously, Sunday night. That's my one show I'm watching as it's currently airing. So this is the only show I'm actively keeping up on right now on network TV.
Yeah.
Or just, I should say network TV. On, Sunday night, 8 o'clock, I'm there for this. I don't miss that. No other show am I doing that with. You made the comment to me today that if we weren't doing the podcast, you do not think that you would be actively watching it at, Sunday night, 8 o'clock, like you were, say, Game of Thrones.
Right.
Okay. Why? What's the show missing that's not hooking you to the point that it maybe already hooked me?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great thing to bring up. And I do still enjoy the show. I should preface my remarks here with that. I think it's very strong. I'm enjoying it still. Just as you mentioned, Garrett, it's just simply a fact of I probably wouldn't feel the need to be glued to my couch and have to watch it as that new episode dropped, like it was with Game of Thrones, like I anticipate to be with The Mandalorian when it drops tomorrow. So, there's a main factor to this, and I kind of had to self-analyze to realize why this was the case, but I think it's a matter of consistency. So this kind of dovetails with what we were just talking about, with all these characters that they keep piling on, which with a longer running show, or a show where we can anticipate there to be more time to tell your story, I wouldn't think that's a bad thing. And I also am putting my faith in the showrunners to think that they can still wrap this up in the number of episodes that they have remaining. But I understand why you want a lot of different perspectives, but I would have liked this show to hone in a little bit more on Sister Night, hone in maybe a little bit more on Lori, and I know we'll get some future episodes that I'm sure continue to do so, but right now it feels like they're stretching everything very thin, and I'm not getting as much time devoted to specific characters as I would have liked to see.
I think that's a fair criticism, and I think it's interesting because Lori has come in episode 3, and all of a sudden she seems like she's a co-equal main character to the show, co-partner, right? I mean, she's been in this, if not just as much, if not more, in the last 2 episodes, specifically episode 3, than Sister Night has, who we have generally thought was the main character of the show. It looks like next episode we're going to get a very heavy Tim Blake Nelson Looking Glass episode. So, obviously very excited for that. We like that character. But introducing Lori Blake, who I really like, I actually really enjoy her character. I think she's one of the strongest characters of the show, if not the strongest character of the show, actually. She might be my favorite character now. But with the introduction of her, you also are now eliminating things like Red Scare, who I really enjoy.
That's right.
And Pirate Jenny, and Panda. Like, I thought Panda, going back to the first episode, would be a funny character that would be in the show way more often than he has been. Specifically because you have that scene in episode 1 where they're kind of in, I don't want to call it church, but in their church, and he's sitting there with that panda on his head. I just think that people would have been asking more about him. You would have got more information about Panda. Not that he's, a vigilante per se, out there fighting crime, but I just thought maybe he would have been more of a presence in the show of somebody for the vigilantes to combat as far as like procedure.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point to bring up, because the reason why that first episode hooked me so well, I I love that first episode. That's still my favorite. The pilot is my favorite episode thus far. But it's kind of setting the stage for the new Watchmen. I was expecting there to be more of a collaboration between Pirate Jenny, Red Scare, Panda, Looking Glass, Sister Night. Like, to have a little bit more of a team up. Maybe that's the downfall of us being immersed in Avengers and Justice League for so long. Who knows? But that's more what I was anticipating. Now, it's great that we are getting so much of Lori because I find her character fascinating. And I'm in agreement with you, Garrett. She's quickly become probably my favorite character on this show. So I'm really glad that we are getting to see her character more often. That's great. I had also mentioned from the outset for what I was hoping to see out of this, if they're going to be bringing back some of these characters, is Ozymandias, which be careful what we wish for because we got more Vite in this episode and it's really twisted and bizarre. But also, of course, Dr. Manhattan. I did want to see a little bit more of Dr. Manhattan just because I find his character so fascinating as well with how detached he is. So I hope we get some Dr. Manhattan here soon. And once again, I'm not trying to knock the show. I'm still really enjoying it. It's just a couple things that I was hoping for or that I was anticipating just simply haven't really happened yet. So who knows, though? We've still got quite a few episodes left, really, in terms of the grand scope. We're only halfway through, so they've got a lot of ground they need to cover, but they still have, 5 episodes to do it in? So
correct.
I'll put my faith in that for now.
Well, I'm curious, too. Is there anything the show can do, maybe next episode, to just rehook you right back in?
Yeah, absolutely. And it honestly looks like it will probably do so because they're going to, it seems like, give us more of Looking Glass's backstory. So my comments about learning more and seeing more of the new Watchmen group with Red Scare, Looking Glass, that group, it looks like we're going to start to get some of that. So that's a great selling point to me there. I also have to imagine that this front half of this series seems like it's establishing all your characters, and then the back half, what I would hope for is that, okay, now you've got all the players, let's actually put them in motion and focus on these individual characters and spend some more time with them to tell their story more effectively. So I hope the introduction to all these characters kind of stops here, and now we've got our cast of characters and their varying goals and aims, and let's explore that a little bit more. Let's not keep introducing more and more and more people. So.
Well, I'll tell you, I thought back to your comment on Dr. Manhattan. Now, when we get to Ozymandias, we're talking about the candles on the cake here. And
yes.
we always cover him at the end of our episodes, so we can talk more about him then. I don't think you're going to get Dr. Manhattan until episode 7.
Probably not.
And the reason why I say that is, just going back to the newspaper clip where it's, Vite is officially declared dead. It's about 7 years to declare somebody dead, I believe. And I would think that since we kind of understand that he is either on a different planet, on the moon, in a different dimension at this point, that he was placed there probably by Dr. Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And if it's been 7 years since somebody's seen him, he's probably be officially declared dead by then. So again, I think he's 7 years off somewhere, whether it's behind, in front, whatever it is. We've talked about him in an alternate timeline here, and he is in an alternate timeline.
Yeah, he's got it.
But I think that Dr. Manhattan then won't make a first appearance until episode 7, when it's the 7th year. I'm assuming that. Or even episode 8. I mean, it's possible.
That's true.
Because at the end of the day, when we introduce Dr. Manhattan as the only true superhero in the show, do the stakes change? Because he can essentially do whatever he wants to do as he is, a Superman type person or being. The 7th Cavalry can't deal with Dr. Manhattan. Whatever, Dr. True or Lady True and potentially Will Reeves are cooking up probably can't handle Dr. Manhattan. So the reality is once you introduce him in, it's the equivalent of introducing Superman, and then the stakes really change if you're going to have a conflict. Yeah. So really it's probably better to limit his exposure in this show.
No, I totally get where you're coming from with that. And I think that ultimately is a smart move. Once again, it's just on a personal level. I like his character. I'm really fascinated by his character. So maybe it's selfish of me to wish for that. But that's just something that I'd be okay with seeing. And we've also discussed, too, in the past that I think his character is so detached that you can write his character in earlier if you wanted to and not have him necessarily directly involve himself until later episodes where he kind of goes full Superman, let's say, to stop whatever conflict is happening, if that's what he would wish to do. But he's also very much detached in a way that Superman is not. So you have a little bit of a different mentality with how he'd go about using his powers, I guess is my point.
So speaking about Superman, let's talk about Lady True here.
Yeah.
We kind of get a little Superman light, introduction here. So I thought this was fascinating. So we get not even really a alternate historical introduction. We did the first 2 episodes. We really didn't get the 3rd episode, didn't get this episode, but we do get the Clarks, which is funny. The Clarks are on a farm and looks like selling eggs, reading a book called Fog Dancing, which I believe is by somebody. I was looking this up earlier just about the book. It's in a reference to something done by Pirate Jenny, or whoever does the Pirate Jenny, I think, comic in the comic book, or the comic book.
Sure.
Just interesting. But essentially what happens is you realize that they are, they can't have a baby, or they don't have a child. And Lady True knocks on their door and shows up and introduces herself. And what an introduction she gets. She is a trillionaire, as she corrects them. She told them that she wants to buy their farm and their acres and their house, specifically their house and their acreage. And she gives them 3 minutes. And within this 3 minutes, as they say, no, get out, she explains to them that she is very well aware that they cannot conceive a child, that they have been trying to conceive a child, and they went to a fertility clinic, and that she took it upon themselves to actually create a baby for them. And she brings the baby in, and they end up saying yes. They end up, basically because she says, if you don't take this child and take this deal, I'm going to destroy this baby. And then she jokes and says, just kidding, I'll give it to another family, blah, blah, blah. They take the deal. So she gets this farm. And as soon as this happens, something falls out of the sky.
Yeah.
I don't think we know what falls out of the sky. Is that correct?
I don't think we do.
But she claims it's hers. It's interesting.
Yes, very much so.
Do you think that baby's a clone?
I have a strong feeling that it is, yes.
I think so, too.
I think there's multiple clones, which we can get into later. But
yes.
I think that is a very common theme here.
Okay. I thought this was a pretty neat introduction, because they do acknowledge that she is a trillionaire. She did buy, well, they don't really acknowledge it here, but later in the show that she bought Vight's company.
Yes.
She's building a clock, essentially. That's what the large construction building thing is. And that she owns essentially the planes or the flying craft that would have picked up Laurie's car and dropped it. So we do know that it's not Dr. Manhattan that did that.
We do.
It is, in fact, Lady True's flying space craft, whatever they call them. What's your thoughts on Lady True?
Yeah, obviously they set her up to be kind of a foil to probably what a lot of our characters will be going up against here. Later with the investigation, we get to learn a little bit more about her and about her daughter. But I thought that introduction was really great. It sets her up as being someone that you immediately understand is very powerful and is willing to do just about anything to get what she wants. On top of that, I found the whole concept of her argument for legacy over money. That was very interesting. So she's not really offering them a sum of money, and she understands that they're not going to sell their house for any sum of money. It's that she's offering them legacy by way of this child that, oh, by the way, it's biologically yours, and I took it upon myself to make you a baby, essentially, which is kind of terrifying as well.
Well, and one thing I think that's not really subtle in this particular episode, but it's really in your face, are eggs.
Yes.
I wrote eggs down because eggs are all over the place in this episode.
What do you think the symbolism behind that is?
I mean, obviously the most obvious one is birth, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like legacy, like you said, being able to give birth. But I think back to Egg Farm. What's Angela's husband's name? Cal. Yes. Cracking eggs into the pancake batter. That the acorn is essentially an egg to the tree. That Angela gets inside the African American historical building of history of violence or whatever it is. I just thought that was very interesting. And again, it's not really subtle because we've seen eggs in different parts of these episodes before. Back to the first episode when Angela's cracking them into the bowl, and it's the smiley face.
Yeah, that's right.
Whenever they're cooking, it seems to be she's cracking eggs all the time. Will Reeves' eggs, when he gets hard-boiled eggs back at the first episode as well. So I don't know if it's in a comic book thing. Again, I've never read the comic. I know you did. I don't remember it being in the movie. So I'm not sure if this is something Lindelof is adding as just the eggs are such a symbolic thing in the show. How about yourself?
Yeah.
What do you think that they mean?
Agreed. So I agree with what you said. Something that immediately sprung to mind was as a symbol of fertility as well. So that was certainly something that came to mind. But also, I'm wondering if they are a stand-in for clones because they are so uniform in appearance. So that crossed my mind too, because the implications now are beyond just hints. I mean, we kind of got over that with every moment we spend with Veidt, understanding that he's involved in a cloning process of some kind. But the fact that these eggs keep popping up everywhere outside of what you would immediately associate with a representation of fertility, that's why my mind went to clones as well, kind of that uniformity that it's constantly calling your attention to. So something else that crossed my mind with that.
Yeah. I know it's been in the show, but this episode, I couldn't not write it down because it's so in your face in this episode that eggs are such an important characteristic of the show.
Agreed.
Let's talk some Sister Night. So when we finally get to Angela, she is back at her Milk in Hanoi, I think is what it's called, right?
Yes.
I think it is. Her bakery.
Her bakery, yeah.
And she starts dismantling the wheelchair, and she starts cleaning it and getting rid of evidence because, obviously, Lori Blake is on her trail. And, one thing I just want to take the time to ask, what kind of ink is she spraying her face?
Oh, I guess I don't know. I just took it as like a black spray paint of some kind.
Because I thought to myself, I'm surprised it doesn't stick more, harder to wash off, it seems like. And then I thought to myself, what if she just gets some of it in her eye?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think I would spray paint my eyeballs or my eye. And so.
Right. Well, I have to imagine, like any other face paint that you can use prior to going to a football game or something like that. That's kind of what crossed my mind. But the fact that she's using an airbrush to apply it is certainly much more thematic than having like a can of
that's true.
Spray paint essentially.
No, absolutely.
To spray across your face. But
I like how she dismantles it. She bags it up. She'll get rid of it later.
Yes.
But during this time, she gets a phone call from the Center of African American Violence or History, Victims of Violence, whatever it is, and it's basically saying that they've uncovered a branch of her family tree.
Yes.
And she decides to head that way, realizes that there's some kind of a break-in there. There's not a break-in that we can see. She acknowledges as she calls into the police department that she's going to break in. She goes to the Lewis Gates Jr. Basically screen that she went to prior, and she gets an acorn. And I thought this was really cool because this acorn thing is able to branch out your entire family tree.
Yeah.
And I wrote something down here. It reminded me, this particular scene really reminded me of the movie Demolition Man.
Okay, yeah.
You know what I mean? For some reason, this whole section where she goes to this African American History Center, the acorn, the family tree, the computer generation of it just reminded me of a very Demolition Man, post-apocalyptic feel for some reason.
That's such a good thing to call out as well, because I think one of the world-building elements they've introduced here that sets it apart is the juxtaposition of a lack of certain technologies we have now that we take for granted with other technologies that we clearly don't have yet. And this just, once again, called that directly to mind, that it does feel very sci-fi in this particular sequence where she plants the acorn and it does this holographic tree that pops up. It's super cool. Yeah.
And she's able to determine, who her grandfather is, who her parents are, that they disappeared, that the kid disappeared, and that he's not really disappeared, obviously. But she obviously yells, stay away from me at the screen. And then she hears a loud crash. She goes outside and she realizes Lori is out front, based off a continuation of the third episode.
Yes.
And that the car is right in front of her and she's laughing. And she pulls her gun. I like how she's fake laughing, turns around and pulls the gun on Angela, right?
Right.
But I thought that this was I like how he connected these scenes.
Yeah, I did too. And I think it also established something really important. We obviously know with Veidt that we've got different timelines going on, but it showed with this sequence specifically that in the current quote-unquote timeline, they're willing to go back a little bit and butt these scenes up together to see what was happening at the same time as something else. So I'm sure that now that the precedent has been set, and maybe it was prior to this, to be honest, this is the first scene that really jumps out at me for that.
First scene that I can think of that we're connecting spots of a previous part of the episode.
And I can see that since we discussed already at the outset of this episode how we get so many different perspectives happening that if they start to weave them together like this, it seems very Tarantino-esque in a way. So if they start to weave these together, these different perspectives, but they're all converging to a same or similar moment in time, that could be really cool. And I think that would be very worth the payoff at the end to do so.
Yeah, I think you're correct on that. What's your take on this meeting? Angela admits to her vehicle as she unlocks it and gets in. She verifies that nothing is stolen. The pills are in from Will Reeves. Pills or medication is in the glove compartment box. She does hide that from Lori. But, you know, I don't know. Anything stand out to you at this particular scene?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that stood out to me most about it was just it's once again reinforcing that tension between Angela and Lori. I think that was a big component of this that they were just striving to show us again. And the fact that you kind of get from the takeaway here that it's not just Angela, okay, this is my car, let me, get it totaled, whatever the case may be. It's, oh, no, now that Lori has it, it's part of the investigation. So yeah. I think that's an important thing to establish, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does return her back to her house.
Yes.
And the kids are sleeping. She lays in bed on the bunk bed with Topher. Topher gives her a little creature. I like the fact that when she walks in the room, Topher's room is also space.
Yeah. That was really cool.
I got a Dr. Manhattan vibe from him in a prior episode just on his aloofness to things. His obviously building of the castle, the way he destroys it is similar to the way Dr. Manhattan destroys his castle on Mars that we see. So I don't know why. Maybe I'm just seeing connections that aren't there. But for some reason, I believe Topher is connected to Dr. Manhattan. And I don't know. I can't explain it any more than that. When I just see him, I think of Dr. Manhattan. That he's very logical. He's very cold. He calculated. I just find that he is.
Yeah, in a show like this, there's no way that is an accident. So
right.
Whether it truly develops into something more, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But it is for sure, it has to be intentionally calling to mind Dr. Manhattan, I would think. I totally agree with you.
Okay, so Cal has a conversation with his children at the breakfast table about death. Do you remember this conversation?
Oh, yeah.
What's your thoughts on this? Because I thought this was a really interesting spot for Cal to be.
Yeah, I mean, the gist of the conversation we're referring to is when Cal and Angela were in the kitchen cooking breakfast, it looks like, and then they turn to an argument at the table that Topher is having with his sisters.
Yes.
Say, what's wrong? Topher says that Uncle Judd didn't go to heaven when he died. Cal walks over and just said, well, heaven's a lie. It's pretend. So we start as nothing, and we're born, we live, we get old, we die, and then we return to nothing, essentially. And then I love the fact that Angela calls him out on the fact after, really? Nothing? That's how you address this topic with our children?
Well, and I thought that's such a weird take because Cal's not in the show very much.
Right.
We really don't know what he does. I can't remember if we do know what he does. I can't remember what it is. He doesn't get a lot of screen time.
No.
And this is I don't want to say it's a hot take, but it's definitely a hot take for this character to have.
It's a very abrasive line of dialogue
to
for
children.
Him to use, yes, with his children when we also don't, just like you said, get much screen time. So with his character, I just found it very bizarre and kind of sad that this is just how he bluntly addresses his
Well, it's really funny,
children.
too. Maybe that's an inside joke to, Lost. And spoiler alert. The fact that it's kind of like they're kind of in purgatory.
Oh, okay. I gotcha.
That's... And people, I think, had that theory at the beginning of Lost, when that first happened anyways. What if these people are really dead? But I think that's interesting that, in one show they're talking about, purgatory and religion and religious symbols and all this stuff. To the Watchmen where he's dead, and death doesn't work. And it also goes to me Angela's a nun costume. Just there's some, religious symbolism here.
Very much so. Then later we even get... I'm sure it's because Lori's calling her out on her costume, which you'll probably get to the scene just a little bit here. But yeah, what'd she say? Were you raised by nuns, or were your parents murdered by nuns, or were you raised by nuns? I forget.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
That line really threw me, but that whole scene is great.
Yeah.
Between the two of them.
Well, what's great is after this episode, or at the end of the breakfast scene, we get some Looking Glass. She goes to Looking Glass's property. He has a bunker on his property,
which surprises me very little for his character. For what little we know about Looking Glass, the fact that he has this bunker is oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, one thing we do clarify as well, though, is they are aware of who each other are without their identities.
Very true.
Because he opens it up and knows exactly who she is. She knows exactly who he is. So I was incorrect when I said maybe Looking Glass was not aware in the third episode what Angela's real name was. They do exactly know who each other are. Mm-hmm. But he goes down there, and what's fascinating about him is he's tracking rain, like rainstorms of squids.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a great callback to that, because who knows if we were going to get it again.
I think it's going to be really important.
Okay. What do you think it is?
I think there's got to be something connected between Veidt and the fact that these squid rainstorms still occur, and then potentially why we'll get Dr. Manhattan reintroduced as well. Now, admittedly, some of this theory stems from the fact that of just the glimpse that we get into the following episode, so jumping ahead potentially here, but when he's talking about the squid, he seems, sympathy probably isn't the right word here, but he sounds almost sad, I guess. He makes a comment, and this is not a direct quote, but how they're probably just as lost and confused about why they're showing up here, essentially, in our world. So I think that has to be foreshadowing to something that will follow from here. And then, once again, what I referenced to fast-forwarding to the next episode, where it looks like he's part of maybe a cult, self-help group of some kind, where ours is like the one true dimension that they're kind of going through this reciting, essentially, of what sounds like a prayer almost of some kind. So I'm really looking forward to this next episode, especially, to see what happens with all this.
Now, I have not seen The Leftovers, but I know Lindelof did that show as well.
That's
and
right,
I do think it does have some cult activity in there, if not based around cults. So I think that will be kind of a funny callback to anybody that's maybe a Leftovers fan.
Right.
But what I want to talk about is after the Squid Rain storm picture, thing, we get the conversation with Angela where she asks Lookingglass, were you aware Judd was a racist man? And Lookingglass's response was really interesting. He goes, he's a white man in Oklahoma. At which point she looked at him, and at which point I paused my show and I said, he's also a white man in Oklahoma, because you've had some potential questions about, is Lookingglass going to turn out to be, I don't want to say a bad guy, but maybe caught up in something.
Right. And I did have some initial impressions that was likely the case, especially because what we can glean from his relationship with Judd, we don't get a lot of it just because Judd is killed in the first episode. But it seems like between their interactions and what we can kind of infer, that they had probably a pretty good friendship. So I'd assumed that from the outset, but now with what we know about Lookingglass, we know a little bit more about him, at least at this point. And I'm actually less inclined to think that now. It seems like what he's caught up in is this whole interdimensional side of things. I think his worries and concerns and whatever potential trouble he might be in is more on a cosmic level rather than Tulsa, Oklahoma, racial tension between 7th Cavalry members and the police department and things of that nature. So I think it's a much different issue that he's going through than what I initially assumed he would be.
Well, and I agree with you. And I think as we have 5 episodes left, it's very hard if all of a sudden you're going to spin it where he is involved in this, if it's only 5 episodes left in this show and the show will end.
Yeah, and they haven't done anything else to establish him as being
so
involved.
Even if it turns out that he is, I might not care.
Right.
Which I thought it was interesting that you said that he's concerned more with the interdimensional versus Tulsa, Oklahoma. Again, Lady True buys Weitz Corporation from New York City, but relocates to Oklahoma. I'm still waiting for, why does everything coalesce to Oklahoma? Outside of it, it's just, we picked Oklahoma because of the Tulsa race riot. Like, I'm still waiting to be given that information of what's making these, even the former Minutemen, like Lori Blake, and even maybe Dan, if Dan's still in custody, coalesce to this one state, which is kind of far away from New York City, where everything generally took place in the comic book. So again, I know that it's a Lindelof decision to make it. I know he's basing this around racial tensions, and so it gives you this nice backdrop of racial tensions in Oklahoma. But I'm kind of hoping there's an explanation of whether it's cosmic, whether it's interdimensional, what makes Oklahoma the spot that this show had to take place on.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, there's a lot of racial tension in New York City. There's a lot of racial tension in the South. There's a lot of racial tension everywhere in this country, not just Oklahoma. So whether the linchpin is the Tulsa race riots, I get it. If it's anything more than that, I'm hoping he explains that, because I think that's needed, because I have no explanation of why it's in Oklahoma. Do you? Or why these characters are moving from New York City to places in Oklahoma to set up giant clocks.
Yes, I totally understand where you're coming from with that, and I do not have an explanation for it as of yet. So
no, that's okay.
Yeah.
One thing I really like, though, is Angela asks or takes the medication that was Will Reeves and hands it to Lookingglass and says, can't your ex-wife look into this? And, basically off record. And I love his response of, well, she's my ex-wife. And I think that's great, because I'm hoping it kind of maybe introduces a new character, but just a good backstory to Lookingglass would be really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I really like to also mention that maybe I'm correct here in the theory I had. She pulls out the robes the KKK robes that was in the closet and hands them to Looking Glass, and he's definitely shocked by this, I think, right? Would you agree?
I agree. I took that at face value.
Yes.
I mean, I think when she shows him what she found, he is taken aback by that.
Right.
Yes.
And I think what's really fascinating is he does mention that these are old-looking robes, and that his father, very well a lawman, might have been involved in this prior. Because if you think about what is considered the Klan in the present day, they are Rorschach mask-wearing people. They're not necessarily full, white robe garb. So my theory was maybe Judd's not actually a KKK member or a 7th Cavalry member. His father was. And maybe he has connections or acquaintances that way because his mother worked for Keene, and you and I are concerned or convinced that Keene is definitely the 7th Cavalry person moving the chess pieces here.
Right.
So maybe there's connections there. Judd Crawford himself, though, maybe protected by them, wasn't actually a member or operating under their, actions. I'm kind of leaning that way. I'm kind of leaning to maybe he actually will turn out to be a good guy. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm still on the fence about this one, and the reason why is, once again, skipping ahead for our topics here, but at the very end, where we get Will and Lady True's conversation, and you get, once again, the tick-tock that they bring back, which the predominant group we've seen do that is 7th Cavalry. And now they're saying it. Judd said it at the end of episode 1, prior to his death. So I keep going back and forth. I think this definitely lends credibility to your theory where maybe he was not actually a member, but maybe he was still caught up in some way with the 7th Cavalry in other ways. So even if he was not an actual member, yes, he probably was still in some trouble of some kind, because it seems like, once again, the vast conspiracy that we keep hearing about, it seems like he's involved in some way. I just don't know what.
Okay. Let's talk about the lube man.
Yes.
So
very bizarre.
As Sister Night just gets rid of the wheelchair, she throws it into a passing train. She turns around and she is spotted by a guy. Take it from here. Describe this guy, because I'm having trouble describing specifically what he's wearing.
It's just, it's a completely silver costume. I'm drawing a blank right now. I'm kicking myself for the name of. It's like what you see people at in sporting events, where they, it's all green though sometimes.
Yes.
And so he's got his little, it looked like a fanny pack at first, this little belt that he's wearing. And as he's running away from Angela, he squirts the stuff from his lube, presumably, from his belt all along the back of his head and his back. And then in a move that completely caught me off guard, he slides into the sewage drain. Just slips right through. And I love Angela so much in this show because she's the voice, I think, for all of us. When her car was picked up by the ship, she's like, what the F is going on? And she says the same thing here, and that's the exact same thought that's running through my mind during these scenes, where it's kind of the off-the-wall bonkers thing that happens, and it's Angela who witnesses it, that's in disbelief herself at what she's seeing. So this came out of left field. I don't know how I feel about the introduction of this bizarre masked character, other than some comedic relief, which the show could use some of that at times. But I don't know. It was very silly. It was very bizarre. What are your thoughts on who it is, though? Because I have an idea of who it probably is.
Keep going.
Sure. Okay, well then, my theory is that it's probably Pete.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's probably Pete, because he is so obsessed with masked vigilantes. He is so obsessed with the backstory of Lori and the history of the Minutemen and all these different masked vigilantes. And it seems to me like he would probably be trying to take a more active role in this investigation, even though he's kind of the sidekick in a way here. So it makes total sense to me, especially with his frame. He seems kind of tall and lanky, and I think he would probably be the kind of person to don his own suit, don his own mask, and try to go do his own investigation. So I think it's Pete.
You know what? I'm not even going to try to guess, because you convinced me, and I haven't even taken a second to think about who it would have been outside of just a new character they would have told us.
Gotcha.
If it's an existing character, that would absolutely make sense. Because the only other person I can think of that would show up as a superhero, again, it would be Dale. I think it's Dale, right? No, Cal. Sorry, Cal.
Oh, Cal.
Angela's husband. Just because I'm convinced there's something more to Cal than we get, but it's not Cal.
There's no way that's Cal,
no.
though. Yeah, there's no way that's Cal. So
I think you're I think you're onto something.
Thanks.
Which would be really funny. And it would have been funnier had he got caught, like stuck.
Yes, I know.
Stuck in the sewer, and she unmasks him.
I totally agree with you. I don't like that it's almost now, once again, another lingering plot thread that we'll have to resolve. I think him getting stuck would have been perfect.
Yes, because I would like to see him have to answer to Lori.
Yes.
Which is great because once she comes back to the, she takes his utility belt, his lube belt, and she goes back to the police station and she talks to Red Scare about it and Pirate Jenny, and he calls him the lube man.
Yes.
And he gets it on his hands like, what is this crap, where we find out Lori has become the new, I don't want to say chief, but definitely the person in charge.
Yeah, at the very least, acting chief, I guess, is probably what she's doing there.
Yes.
Very interesting development, though.
But what's great about this, though, is it forces her to become a character that's going to stay in the show, which I like. Because, again, I think the reason why I like Lori Blake the most now is I love her cynicism. I love the fact that, like, when they're driving to go to meet Lady True, she's talking about how she used to ride with all these different yahoos and, yahoos this and yahoos that. Like, yeah. I love that she's definitely a woman scorned, right? She's definitely been let down a lot in her life and not lived an easy life. And she put her life on the line. She did the comic book or the superhero thing. And I think she maybe thinks it's ridiculous and that maybe good fashion FBI police work is the best. You don't have to be a vigilante. So I just like her character. Again, probably becoming my favorite character. But let's talk about this car ride, because I thought this car ride was really good. I love that Sister Night was basically asking her about about her history. And Lori's like, well, Petey, you tell her.
Yeah, you tell it. That was great.
Does a great line about how her parents are Silk Spectre, and the comedian, which does catch Angela off guard.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. Maybe Angela didn't realize that she was Silk Spectre too. And that she's basically a product of sexual assault. And, I just thought that was great. And I love that. And she's like, great, we all know each other. I just love that cynicism. Like, you want to know who I am? Fine. This is who I am. I don't make any bones about it. I'm not apologizing. I don't hide behind a mask anymore. You need to quit hiding behind a mask. I like that part of her, especially when she's like, do you want to put your mask back up? Like, I like it. I like that she's taking shots at her. I think she's an awesome character. What's your take on that car ride?
I totally agree with you. I think the car ride was a really great scene. Probably one of my favorite scenes in this entire episode, actually. And once again, you get to understand more of that dynamic between Angela and between Lori and the conflict that is kind of brewing between them, but at the same time, they're having to set aside their differences, right? Because they're both trying to investigate. Now, at the same time, Angela knows about Will, where Lori does not. So in the following scenes here, I think it creates a very interesting dynamic as well, because Angela probably wants to help Lori in the bigger picture, but she's not quite ready to help Lori with the fact that she knows who Will is and his connection to Judd's death. So it's like there's this big picture that they're probably trying to coordinate to help together, but then it's the initial part of this investigation where very clearly she's not willing to work with Lori yet.
Sure.
Yeah.
I also like how they mentioned the American hero story.
Yes.
And how Petey immediately goes, that's crap. And he gets so offended by it. And which is great. And I think it lends more credibility to maybe he is Lube Man. I would never have thought of Petey. I didn't even really think too much about who that was.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because there's so much stuff to think about in the show. There's so many Easter eggs.
Yeah, there's a ton of it.
That I like it, though. Like, you've convinced me. So right now I would say, as far as our projections are, we're correct, I want to say, on Veidt being in a different timeline.
Yep.
I want to say that I think I'm going to be right that Judd Crawford is not a 7th Cavalry member.
Fair enough. Okay.
Petey is the Lube Man. Yeah. What else did we have? And that Mr. Phillips will be the human version of Dr. Manhattan.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Do you think that?
What's that?
I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh, we don't know if it's true yet, but I like that idea.
It's a neat theory.
Yeah, it is a neat theory. You still got Hooded Justice is another theory of ours. That is Will Reeves, which I think this episode went a long way to kind of helping establish that between Petey's comments right here in this same exact car ride that, oh yeah, that show's crap and that it's not historically accurate, essentially.
Yes.
And then fast forward to the end of the episode where we learn a little bit more about Will.
Well, and the thing is I love about Will Reeves, too, not only do we say that his suit is the same color as Hooded Justice, and it would just make sense that in a racial tension show that he would be Hooded Justice. He's 105. The real identity was never revealed. I like that he doesn't wear a tie. Do you notice that? He doesn't have a necktie on, but he's wearing a vest and a button-up shirt and a suit jacket because there's a noose that should be there that's not. And again, it's symbolic of a necktie. I really like that. So again, I just leave some more credibility that he doesn't have the noose, he doesn't have a necktie, that he actually is going to be Hooded Justice. So, but let's talk about Lady True.
Yeah.
So they get to her organization. Her daughter is kind of a front runner for this corporation. She deals with the clients. I'm going to go out right now and say I think her daughter's a clone.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that her daughter is a clone of Lady True. The conversation she has about waking up at the nightmare and walking and her feet hurt and she believes this happened. She doesn't know why she believes this happened. I think it's very... I don't think that's a hot take. I think that the fact that Lady True doesn't seem to love her, that maybe she's cold-hearted, that she tells her that she's not going to walk her back to bed, that she needs to go back to bed. I think that is a small version of Lady True.
Okay.
I think that that's a clone. Do you agree?
I would totally buy that.
Yeah.
Once again, especially this episode specifically, because, once again, jumping ahead a little bit here, but what we get later with Vite, we have all of the egg symbolism, which I meant to me called to mind uniformity and potentially clones. We have the idea that she is very clearly able to biologically engineer, at least to some degree. She bought Vite's company. There's a lot of credibility to that theory, and I absolutely would buy that. What'd you
think of the interaction with Lady True?
Yeah, I thought this whole sequence was really interesting. I like that we get some more about her right away, and the fact that, should have written down the term they use, when they go visit her, because she's growing the plants, her mother had told her never to leave Vietnam, and
yes.
she makes so she's growing the plants. I thought that was really interesting too, so we get to learn a little bit more about her backstory in the same episode, which I think is really important. But It's very clear. I don't think that either Angela or Lori are buying really what she's saying. What are your thoughts on that, though?
I mean, I don't think they can trust her. I don't think they're buying it. I'm really interested in what this clock will be or what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that when she's speaking Vietnamese. So there's a couple things I found that were more interesting about this scene. Sure. The statue of Vite is a Jeremy Irons statue. It's a modern day statue. She does not say that's what he looked like. She says that's what he looks like, as in modern present day. I like that she was speaking Vietnamese, and that she acknowledged that she knows Will Reeves, and that she's looking for his medication. I don't know. I think that that's a fascinating thing. I really like the Jeremy Irons part to it.
Yeah.
What did you think of that statue?
I did too. I think that's very telling of our ongoing theories about this. And if Vite was truly considered to be dead, at least by someone like Lady True, why would she have a fairly accurate statue of what he would look like as an older man?
Yeah.
So I found that really, really interesting. I like what she said as well about how I think she mentions that in her culture you would, in the case of the statue, they revere, the elderly because of their wisdom, essentially. I'm
correct.
Paraphrasing a little bit there, so I'm sorry if I get something wrong. But so I thought that was very important, too, because it's clearly establishing the fact that she admires Vite and his work, I would assume, by not only did she buy his company, but she's very clearly following in his footsteps as well.
Yeah.
There's something else I was going to mention. Oh, obviously the technology. So we get to see the planes, the ships, if you will, as well, which I think is very important. She can probably go anywhere and do just about anything at a moment's notice, which might be very important later to remember that, of course, with some of this much power and what they're potentially capable of doing. And then also the fact that this is very Ozymandias-like to me, that this is not the eighth wonder of the world, this clock tower. It is the first wonder of the new world.
Yes.
Which I think is very, very foreshadowing what will at least be their goals that have yet to be fully revealed.
Okay. No, I think that's interesting. I wrote this down here, and I can't remember exactly why I wrote this down. There's a mention of Cal's accident.
It's in passing. Yeah, you're right.
What do you think that is? Because again, I'm still on the record of there's way more to his character than we get because of he's a pretty big actor at this point now in his career to just be a one-off random husband in this show. So what do you think his accident is?
I honestly do not know. What are your theories on this?
I don't know. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I remember I questioned on the White Knight, not to say like he's villainous or anything like that, but the fact that she pushes him out of the way and he doesn't seem to come back into the scene of the action. Maybe that's just me nitpicking that scene, and they were just trying to accomplish showing you what the White Knight was. But he's a very built guy. He seems to be able to handle a gun. There's something about him. We don't know what his occupation is. And they mentioned this accident. He doesn't seem to be physically impaired, mentally impaired.
Right.
So I don't know what the accident would be. I don't know. He's one of the question marks for me. I feel like I need an answer to what Cal is or what's going on with him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they keep, well, especially in this one, this episode probably makes the biggest argument toward them leading us to believe there is more to his character than what we've been made aware of thus far. So I would not be surprised at all if he, in the back end of this season, ends up being a major player in some capacity. Again,
though, if they're going to all of a sudden make him important, they have 5 episodes to do so.
Yeah.
I would feel like if he's going to become a very important role, he needs to step up. And they need to make that known because we're introducing, potentially Petey as Lube Man, which maybe it's a one-off. Maybe we don't see him again, and that was just a fascinating thing where we're going to uncover that he's a wannabe superhero vigilante since he's so fascinated with them.
Right. It could be as simple as, while he didn't get stuck, necessarily in the drain, in the sewage drain there, but we could still get almost a very short scene of being like, oh, yeah, that was you idiot, or something like that. Which makes
sense it does make sense because once they come back to the police station and he walks in the office, he does kind of stop until he's told just to come all the way in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that foreshadow of when we saw the White Knight, the guy standing over him, and it transposes to Judd Crawford, that we see Petey walks in and stops when he sees Sister Knight.
Yes.
In the office.
And it also just, granted, of course they could write in whomever they wanted to introduce us to later that, oh yeah, they were investigating Angela, but who else would have motive to be trying to follow her and figure out what she's doing and what's going on? I just can't think of anybody else where that would make sense.
I can't imagine somebody not doing it incognito. like he probably would have been way more successful just wearing a suit and tie walking across the street.
That's the best part. He's wearing this shiny suit.
So when I saw him, 2 things. I thought of obviously Looking Glass at first.
Yeah, very
And
true.
then I thought of, it's in the movie The Incredibles, the sidekick guy, the buddy, the family. He's the black guy in the Incredibles.
Yeah, Frozone.
Frozone. For some reason, I thought of that guy when I first saw Lube Man. So I thought that was really funny. Let's talk Lady True and Will Reeves, and really just talk Will Reeves there. We acknowledge we both think that Lady True's daughter is a clone.
Agreed. Yes.
And then let's talk about maybe what we think her aims are going to be. And then let's go to, like we always do with Veidt, because he had such a great episode again. And he's just fascinating. He's loving playing this role, I think, too, by the way.
That dude is chewing scenery and loving it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk Will Reeves here. So Will Reeves, we realize that he's a part of some form of conspiracy here. We don't know exactly what his end game is. Right. He does acknowledge that he has betrayed Angela. He will make her angry. And there's 3 days as a time period. So I'm assuming, is that going to be next episode? Is that going to be 3 episodes? I don't know if they're days. We don't, in this timeline.
Right.
What do you think they're doing here?
Gosh, I think there's a lot of, obviously the clock imagery is hitting us over the head. There's egg imagery that's now hitting us over the head. There's the comments about the first wonder of the new world. I think they're truly following in Veidt's footsteps here. I think they're trying to do a hard reset of some kind of cataclysmic event here that will reset the clock. Hence the term there. They're literally trying to reset the clock and kind of start humanity over in a vision of their future that is unlike obviously what it would be if time progressed.
So you mean almost like another catastrophe?
Yeah. I think they're trying to do that again. I think the fact that she purchased Veidt's company, that she very clearly seems to revere him and follow in his work, the fact that we get Veidt's kind of goals. We don't know much about what he's really trying to do. We're trying to infer a lot here, but we still get him kind of intercut throughout these episodes as well. Tick tock, tick tock. It all comes down to the clock and these themes about time, and now we've get the new order essentially that they're trying to establish, or at least that it seems like they're trying to establish. So I think that's what their end game is. I think they're trying to do a hard reboot of humanity essentially through some kind of cataclysmic event and start things over. And I think the way that they're going to try to potentially either repopulate or to have a hard reset with control over people is through the cloning process. And not just through necessarily clones alone, but through being able to biologically engineer people as well, using the DNA that Lady True very can clearly easily obtain. So I think that's what their goal is. I think they're going very huge in scope here. I think the 7th Cavalry, in terms of a local conflict between Tulsa PD, is actually supposed to mislead us a little bit at this point. I think there's a huge cataclysmic plot line here that is actually the true problem.
So do you feel like ethnic cleansing is the backdrop of the 7th Cavalry versus the backdrop of Lady True? Or do you feel like it's not so much like an racial component to it, her being Asian, but more of a just want to have uniformity?
That's what I think Lady True's goal is, the latter of those two. The 7th Cavalry, from everything we know about them, which is truly very little at this point.
Which is still disappointing.
Yeah, they do seem to be a group of white supremacists, and that is kind of all we really know. So I think for them as a group, we can take that at face value. I think bigger picture, what will actually be the big end game problem that our heroes will have to resolve, which would be a perfect way to finally introduce Dr. Manhattan toward the end of this season, because who better to stop a cataclysmic event than to try to get Dr. Manhattan to do so, and this time not be complacent in it, but to actually try to help stop it. That could be really interesting.
Let's talk this racial tension then, because the reality of it is there's not a ton of racial tension in the show. And I mean that by not saying, obviously, the Tulsa race riots, obviously. The historical components to it, yes. Like the World War I pamphlets being dropped, which we didn't even mention, got caught on fire in the Milk and Hanoi bakery.
Yes. Good call.
She didn't mean to catch on fire, but as soon as the call happened, it just caught on fire. I thought that was a great nuance there. But if you think about the 7th Cavalry, there's nothing specifically to them other than some garbled verbiage that actually their actions are racially motivated. They wear their Rorschach mask, but for what we know is they're at war with the police department and with the government. Like, they're not attacking Judd Crawford's funeral because Sister Knight's there and Cal's there as African Americans. They're attacking that funeral because they're trying to kill as many cops as they can. That's what's kind of interesting is the 7th Cavalry is depicted as being this racial component. And I believe they're racist, don't get me wrong. But the reality is their actions aren't racially motivated right now. Like, killing the cop in the very first episode wasn't killing the cop because the cop was black. He's killing the cop because he wants to kill the cop. There's so far the only racial components are the historical stuff, and then really Will Reeves hanging Judd Crawford is the only other racial component to it. Really of a white on black, black on white violence. Like, there's not a ton of racial motivation here. Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Am I off?
No, I get where you're coming from with that. I think how I continue to interpret the 7th Cavalry is, I agree with you. I think that their primary conflict it seems to be with the police department. I think that they are white supremacists. So yes. I think that's a major component here. And then on top of all that, I think they are pawns as well, though, in this bigger picture with these much more powerful players that are manipulating the pieces. So I think we'll get to understand eventually that Keen, Lady True, that a lot of these people are probably connected toward their end game, and we're going to see how the 7th Cavalry eventually is kind of tied into all that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you expect from Will Reeves going forward then?
His character is really interesting to me. He obviously doesn't need the wheelchair.
No.
So we come to understand this as well by the end of the scene with Lady True and Will. I have no idea what they're going to do with his character. I keep now going back to the fact that if he is Hooded Justice, and maybe this is a pitfall that I shouldn't be going down, a rabbit hole that I shouldn't be falling too far down, because I try to then connect, well, what would Hooded Justice, what would his goals be, by trying to do this hard reset, essentially. So I don't know. His character is very fascinating to me right now, because I did not see him now that we know it's Lady True that was kind of behind that initial, he didn't get kidnapped, his rescue almost, you could say.
Right.
Now that we know that, I didn't anticipate him kind of almost being a villain at this point, which now is kind of making him seem a little bit like a villain to me.
What if there's a zigzag here where it's Lady True, it's Joe Keane, it's Will Reeves, or at least Will Reeves and Lady True here, that they're okay with this cataclysmic event because he's lived through this racial tension forever and they want to have this reset. Maybe that's the point. Maybe he's a part of this racial reset because he's been living this stuff. He's been a part of that Tulsa race riot. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if he'll really be a part of it from that. I still think that isn't there somebody missing, though? We still don't know who his other relative is. Is that correct?
Yeah. Are you talking about Angela's
other sibling?
Correct. We do not.
Right. And we also still don't know what happened to the baby that Will Reeves took in the very first episode.
Yeah, which is still that's gotta be important in my mind.
Yeah, because could be. Okay. I don't have anything more on Will Reeves. I think it's one of those things where I really like that he walked away. He said he doesn't need a wheelchair.
Yeah.
These legs are great. Let's talk some Vite.
Vite, gosh. How twisted was this entire...
Can I just tell you, when he's in the lake and he starts pulling out like fish traps that are filled with essentially fetuses, babies, cloned people, things... And he starts throwing them back in the water.
Yeah, very disturbing.
I thought it was great.
I was admitted. So on our Aliens and Cowboys podcast, we talk about this, but I like miniature wargaming, and so I was actually working on some of this. Like I was working on modeling and like sculpting some stuff for this while I had Watchmen on, and like it was one of those moments where I looked away for a split second to go back to what I was doing, and I saw like him pull out the cage, and I thought I saw the baby, and then I glanced down for a second, and then I heard the water splash. I looked back up, I'm like, what the hell is he doing? Like, the whole scene caught me completely off guard for multiple reasons, but starting with the fact that he's clearly, would you say harvesting?
Yes.
Birthing these things at the bottom of a lake?
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily need to know the process there, but it's very weird and baffling.
Yeah, I agree. We do know that he has a machine that can expedite the growth of these beans into humans, into Phillips and Crookshanks.
Yes.
And I love that why he's cooking them, essentially. The babies are crying, which I thought was just fascinating. My dog was reacting to that, like kept cocking her head to it.
Yeah.
But he's eating his cake again.
Yes. The cake makes another appearance.
He takes them upstairs after he kind of gets them dressed. He walks into like essentially his dining room, and there's just bodies everywhere. And then the cake with the 4 candles. Thought that was great. Then we go out to his catapult.
Yes.
And we realize he's starting to launch bodies, and these bodies are disappearing. Now, in the previous episode, he put what looked like a almost submarine outfit on, or like an old like sailor outfit / astronaut outfit onto a person, and launched them into we don't know where. We don't know where they went after that point.
No idea.
We suspected space because he came back frozen, which would make sense. Here we see he's launching these people, and they're disappearing. Are they going into another dimension?
I'm going to say yes. I think he's trying to... A couple other things that we understand from this scene with Vite is that he now has come to view his existence as a prison, essentially. That he now lives in a prison. At first he thought it was a paradise where he could kind of do whatever he wanted. But now he views it as a prison. He's trying to escape. So I really do think that this is some kind of other dimension. Some kind of... I don't know if it's a planet per se, if this is a force field, but they do disappear very quickly. It seems like the atmosphere is obviously not the same like it would be here on Earth.
It seems to pull out, and it looks like there's a moon. Like he's on the moon is what.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's on the moon. I took it from the way they pulled away from the shot that they are wanting you to think he's on the moon, and that he would have been put there by Dr. Manhattan.
Right.
Which is then more fascinating because who's the game warden?
Yeah.
Right, and the whole hunting thing from the episode before. So I'm assuming that going forward we'll get a lot more of him because I think this is the most screen time he's had in the series so far. Was this tonight's episode?
Agreed.
So I wouldn't be shocked if he gets significant time going forward because it's Jeremy Irons and he's probably the biggest name on the show. What are you hoping for in the week? So we talked about briefly the next week's episode shows a lot of Looking Glass. He's going to go maybe undercover. He's going to go look into something. There's the cult, you think. There's maybe a 7th Cavalry issue going on. They maybe find the church they're looking for.
Yeah.
A lot of things that are fascinating. Good.
Oh, I was just going to say, it looks like it's going to start to pick up steam here.
I think so too. He's got 5 episodes left. We've got to, if we're going to kill people off, we got to start killing people off, which I'd be disappointed if they killed off Looking Glass already.
I hope they wouldn't do that.
No, I agree. But
I mean, very clearly they set the precedent that, once again, nobody's safe in this show.
Right.
The fact that they killed off Judd in the first episode.
Well, not only that, but even Angela, Sister Knight, is, I would argue, the main character of the show. But screen time wise, she has now been relegated to not full time, person. Like, I would say there's more screen time for Laurie Blake, arguably, in the last 2 episodes,
right,
than there is Angela. So, and it looks like there's probably going to be a lot of Looking Glass in this next episode. So that'll be fascinating. Other than that, I'm excited for it. I know you're excited, more excited for Mandalorian. I know you're probably going to stay up all night and watch it.
Yeah, I don't think it drops this evening. I think it's not until tomorrow morning, so I'm going to have to.
I think I'm going to wait a week. I just have a feeling everybody's going to crash that website or crash the app because I don't think they've released the app yet, correct?
No, they haven't. That's what was baffling. You could pre-order the initial subscription for like $6.99. Right? But then you couldn't actually pre-download anything in preparation for that. So you're absolutely right. That means as soon as this thing goes live, everybody's going to be trying to set up accounts and log in, presumably.
Yeah.
So they're going to be testing their server strength.
Yeah.
For sure. But yeah, I am absolutely. I'm stoked for that.
Have you watched his Dark Materials yet? The other HBO show?
Not, but I really want to. We were talking about this earlier as well, Garrett, which I think is important. But the intro to shows.
Yes.
Which is something that I find really fascinating. I like that we had this conversation because you and I share very similar thoughts on it seems like, where that in and of itself can almost hook you to the show and kind of garner your interest toward it. And, so his Dark Materials, the reason why I mentioned that is because the only thing I've seen was an article about the intro, and I listened and watched the intro to that show, which looks very amazing. So
I'll have to do that. I told you, I think my favorite intro of all time has to be Westworld. I think Westworld's got the best intro, and I love that each season it's changed so far. So I'm really excited for what season 3 coming out here, what the intro will be, because with the composer, with what they do with the the figure, and essentially the graphics that they use, because similar to, I think the same guy did Game of Thrones to set this up as well. I believe so. So I think it's just really well done. So I'm excited for that as well. I also really like there's not really a huge introductory thing in this episode. I also like shows that just get right to it.
Get right to it. Yeah, yes. I was going to say, conversely, I think that's great about Watchmen as well, where you don't sit through it or feel the need to skip the intro credits or whatever. It just goes right to it. Well, and shout out again to the soundtrack, though. I love the soundtrack. It is a good soundtrack. It's super good.
It really is. Yeah. I'm not a big music guy, but I don't pick out soundtracks. Like when I'm watching television, I'm not like, oh man, that's a great song. Like, I really don't think that because I'm not a big music guy. This particular show, though, I'm like, yeah, I love that song. That song's great, or it's perfectly timed. The only other time I do, I remember I told you the Zack Snyder movies, actually.
That's right.
Like the Bob Dylan, obviously if you guys listen to this podcast, the very beginning of the show is Joe singing. Joe has the voice like Fergie. He's our talent. And he sings our opening, that Times Are Changing by Bob Dylan. And, it kind of reminds me of Justice League when they do that montage with Superman. And that he's gone.
In that, yes.
And it's just a good song. It's just a well-placed song that fits perfect for the theme. Yeah. And I feel like whoever is the composer does the same thing. The songs are just well-placed. Mm-hmm. But other than that, that's all I got for tonight. Anything else?
Nope, that's all I got, man.
We'll be back with you guys next week with episode 5 for the Watchmen for Nixon podcast. If you like what you hear, go out and give us a review, leave us a rating. If you want to ask us questions or email us comments or concerns or even your own theories, we're at aliensandcowboys@gmail.com. You can get to us on Twitter at alienandcowboy. Every Wednesday, we do have another podcast that we do on pop culture in general. Because of the Mandalorian coming out, I'm assuming that if Joe is able to join us this week, he's going to probably talk about what he's watched on the Mandalorian this week and probably be super excited about that. That podcast is the Aliens and Cowboys podcast. So go out there, subscribe to that. Again, that's a pop culture thing. We cover what's ever going on in the news for that week. So again, we'd like to hear what you guys think. Let us know, and we'll be back with you guys next week. Later.
See ya.